You want me to hook this?
And you can clip it anywhere you want on the collar there.
Well, thanks, you guys. And Dave, thanks for the kind words. And as always, it's great. Sorry. It's great to be here with you guys. And I always enjoy coming to Lake Norman. And there we go. Always enjoy coming to Lake Norman. I always enjoy being around the Scott group, and this is a super turnout on a Friday afternoon like this, and obviously we got a beautiful day. It's a little breezy, which will make it a lot of fun, and it might make it some of the things that I was originally thinking we'd emphasize. Maybe we'll emphasize some other things that I think will be good. But, you know, one thing I guess I want to say for sure is we want to keep this really fun. We want to keep this really light. Anytime you guys have any questions at all, please don't hesitate, because I don't think there's any question that seems inappropriate or too basic. You know, that's what our sport's all about. So anytime you guys want to stop me, you know, let's do it, okay? And what I wanted to do, and I hope this is good with you guys, is kind of do a real brief, you know, maybe a half an hour talk here, just to go over some of the things that I think are important in our sport of sailboat racing and racing Scots, and how we're going to work on those out here on the race course or on the practice race courses. And then we'll come back in after we do that. It sounds like we're going to get some neat video of Tyler and Ryan out sailing around. Did you know that, Ryan? But I think that would be cool, because obviously it's blowing pretty good out there, and obviously it sounds like it's going to blow pretty strong tomorrow too. And you know, it's funny, my new job, my new career is running a college sailing program, and we sail basic 420s, basic FJs, no spinnakers, really hard to adjust anything because the races maybe take a maximum of 15 minutes. But you know what the most important part of racing those things is boat speed. And we spend half our time, and I'm not exaggerating, it might be a little bit more than that, practicing boat speed. And obviously we don't get a tension gauge out on an FJ, you know, where the halyard is done with a 3-to-1 line tackle, you know what I mean, because it's going to change. But we spend a lot of time watching balance, how they ease the main in and out, how much Cunningham they put on, the basic stuff that we worry about. And it's such a huge difference when they're hooked up and going fast, because then all the other stuff we'll talk about and that I wanted to briefly touch on here, like starting and conservative tactics, all become a whole lot easier. You look a lot smarter, obviously, when you're faster. But I guess that's one thing I want to say too, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. People say it's easy to be smart when you're fast, but I would like to preach today that we don't necessarily want to worry about being smart, because how can you be smart, especially on an unlike like this? It's changing all the time. It's very dynamic. You know, it's hard to know what the next shift's going to bring. It's hard to know when the next puff's going to hit, because sometimes they come down. But being conservative and minimizing the risks when we sail, and I'll talk about this, is what makes it makes for a successful race, or more to the point, a successful regatta. So I guess my point is, let's not try to overthink it. Let's just go fast, sail conservatively, and in between those two things, get off the starting line well. So that's really kind of the key. So with that, I'm gonna hand out to you guys kind of a breakdown of what I thought we'd do out on the water. And would you mind passing those out? So, obviously, we're going to do a lot of starting practice. Obviously, we're going to do mark rounding practice. And then I thought at the end, we would do some practice races. And frankly, this is very similar to what we did, I think it was 3 years ago, Dave, was the last time. And you're going to say, oh, the same drills. But it's funny, these are the drills that we use just about every time we practice with our team. And this is I'm very sensitive to this right now. We are in the throes of practicing for the College Sailing Nationals that we're hosting in 2.5 weeks. And it'll be 36 teams. all together with spectators and the sailors and the coaches, we figure it's going to be somewhere around 700 to 750 people at our little sailing center. So needless to say, I'm a little bit tense and wound up right now as we try to get this thing organized. And it's, you know, I guess I never appreciated what somebody like Dave goes through when you put together even a regatta like this or a North American Championship, all the details. I'm an expert on porta potties now. Just ask me anything about porta potties and all that. So anyway, but even as we get close to the Nationals, we do the same kind of drills to practice and line up. But the first thing we need to talk about is boat speed. And I'm not going to necessarily get into tuning. We could talk about that later if you guys want in the debrief this afternoon. I'm imagining that you guys have gone through the tuning guides, whether it's Ryan's or it's Norse with Zeke. I talked to Zeke actually as I was driving here to kind of get some of his latest, what they're doing different now, which frankly isn't that much, just some ways they measure stuff. But I think instead of talking tuning and measuring and all that, we should talk about boat handling because, like I said earlier, when it comes to college racing, that's what makes a boat go fast. And the number one thing, and let's talk about it with the understanding we're going to be sailing in some serious honking breeze today. And, you know, let's first concentrate on the most important part of whatever we're doing, however we got the boat set up, is we want it to be balanced. And you guys have heard this before and you've read this before, and it's kind of like, yeah, we've heard all that jazz. But there can't be anything more important when it's blowing hard like this than to make sure that the helm is very light. What I mean, like, you could almost let go of it and the boat would keep tracking straight when you're going upwind. I'm not suggesting you do that to check it, but that is the goal, is to make the boat have a very light helm. And the reason for that is anytime we have a tug on the tiller, we're dragging the rudder through the water. And on some boats, like some of the big boats out here that have really nice shaped rudders, that's not that big of a deal. It's just an airfoil, hydrofoil shape going through the water, that's okay. But on the Scott, where we just have a hunk of metal, it is literally like dragging a hunk of metal through the water. So we really need to make sure the boat's balanced. Super important. And there's a lot of ways to do it. Obviously, the number one thing is sailing the boat flat. And that sounds like, yeah, we just sail the boat flat. It's blowing 20, we're going to sail it so the foredeck is just about parallel to the water. Yeah, right. That doesn't happen all the time. That's the goal. But as long as we keep that in our mind, that's the goal, that will help. There's a number of things that we need to do to keep the boat as flat as possible. And one is flatten the main out first and foremost. And, you know, unlike some of the other boats that we have, some Lightnings here, some big boats and all that, where you can pull on the backstay to bend the mast, on the Scott, the only tool we have is the Vang. So we got to pull the Vang on hard. And I'm not telling you guys anything different from what you know, but just want to reemphasize that is the only tool we have to make the main flatter. But what goes with the Vang being pulled on tight is a Cunningham. And often this is the part that's left out. And I know a lot of us sometimes don't even bother rigging the Cunningham because it's not that important, but it is right behind the Vang, I think, in heavy air, the most important adjustment. Because, and it's interesting, in college sailing, it is the most important thing when it comes to everything else being set up, because there's only so much you can do with a jib sheet. You're not going to change the rig tension. The leads are pretty well set. There's only so much you can do. The Cunningham becomes a real important tool, because when we pull hard on the Cunningham, what happens to the shape of the sail? Cunningham goes on hard. The wrinkles that we used to have along the luff are minimized. What happens to the shape? Draft goes forward. Right. And what happens to the leech? Opens right up, right? So when that leech opens up, the drag or the heeling moment or the helm lightens up as well. So all of a sudden, we get that Cunningham on and the helm gets a lot lighter. We don't feel as much drag. Now, what is also important to consider, and we see this in medium air, light medium air, where if maybe both people are on the high side, is we're used to having all the wrinkles and leaving the Cunningham off. when we put on just a touch of Cunningham to pull the draft back forward to that, just forward of that 50% mark, you know, that's kind of how sailmakers talk about it. There's the maximum curvature in the sail, max draft they call it. Generally you say you like to have that around 50%. If you have it just a little bit farther forward than that, then the leech opens up, and in medium air it allows you to trim the main harder because the leech is open, and you can trim it in a little harder before you shut the leech off. What do you think happens then when we trim the main in tighter? Point better. And it is crucial. So when we're, you know, it's interesting, and when we're sailing in college and somebody's struggling with height, you know, pointing ability, the first thing we look at is their Cunningham, because they know that the helm's got to be balanced. If the draft's back, they got to ease the main sheet out to keep the helm neutral. When the helm's neutral with the main out, the boat goes fast, but it goes super low. I mean, super low, we might be talking 2 or 3 degrees, 4 degrees. But we all know if we're sailing alongside somebody, especially if we're the weather of them, we'd give anything to have 2 degrees to stay off of falling down into them. Okay? Does that make sense? Everybody good with that? So when we're out there today, we'll look at those 2 things. First, the Vang goes on. And if there's a guide that we could say, this is a cool guide to know we got enough Vang on, are those overbend wrinkles in the lower quarter of the main? Do you know what I mean? So when we bend the mast, let me draw a little picture here. And I'm not much of an artist, so I apologize right now.
The heavy part of the mic can go in your pocket.
Oh, okay, so I don't keep stepping on it.
It's kind of dragging on your neck.
Okay, so when a sailmaker designs a sail, they put curve on the front of it. Now obviously I'm exaggerating a whole bunch. And this is the sail. Here's the foot, right, the leech. And it's a lousy looking sail. There's the battens. Obviously I haven't drawn one in a long time. But the fullness in the sail comes from this luff curve, it's called. And when a mast bends, you know, the luff curve is designed, or the amount of luff curve, to basically match the amount of mast bend you're going to get in heavy air. Otherwise, the sail would just turn into a mass of wrinkles because we just start stretching the sail. But what is cool is if we bend the mast through the Vang to the point where we just start to distort the sail in this area here, because we've bent the mast to where the cloth is getting stretched. I mean, this sounds really basic, but it's truly kind of what's going on. Then we know we've got the sail as flat as we can get it. And it's a good guide. And it's funny, in a lot of boats where you can force mast bend, like a Lightning, for example, where we can put blocks down here and all that jazz, we look for these wrinkles all the time, light air, heavy air, whatever, and you can adjust the mast to that mast bend. But in a Scott or a 420 or an FJ or whatever, those little boats like we sail, the only way to get those is in using the Vang. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you get those if you have a new sail. Will you still get those wrinkles like that?
With the new sail, they'll come just that much faster. Actually, that's a really good question. And actually, that's a good question. That's super, because, you know, some of us have brand new sails that are all crinkly and all that. And if I could say, if, you know, and I know sailmakers would love to have you go out and use them on a day like today, but if you have a brand new suit of sails, and Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, I would hesitate using them today to break them in. Now this sounds like the old days of the square riggers, you know, where ahoy matey, you know, you want your cotton sails to stretch in just right and all that. If you had another set to use, this might be the day to do that and save your brand new spanking sails for a nice 10-mile-an-hour breeze to break them in. Is that fair to say, Ryan?
Absolutely.
Because what happens, because the cloth will stretch, and ideally you want it to kind of break in and stretch evenly, but if we go out when it's blowing 100 like this, or even 95, then the leech will stretch a little bit earlier, right? And the sail will end up being a little flatter. Now,
does anyone have a use that?
Now that I've said that, we all do it, and it is what it is. But you know what I would do, and I don't mean to sound funny, I would sail out of the cove and sail out, and I would be careful not to put too much Vang on initially, and I wouldn't put too much Cunningham on initially, and I wouldn't let the sail luff as much as you can, just to kind of get it to settle. Enough on that topic. I don't mean to beat that into the ground, but it's just something to think about. But that does bring back to the point, when you have a brand new sail where they're not stretching as much, it ain't going to take as much Cunningham to pull those wrinkles out, and it won't take as much Vang to get those little bit of overbend wrinkles in the sail. The older the sail, the more it's kind of stretched and grown, like we all do as we get older, you know. Then we might need a little more Cunningham a little earlier in the wind velocity and a little more Vang. Would you agree, Ryan? Is that what you'd say too? Does that make sense, you guys? So therein lies the difference. So when people say, oh, new sails are faster, I think the reason they're faster is it allows you to change gears that much quicker. And that's the name of the game that we're talking about here, changing gears. Okay, any questions on that? Yeah.
So you're saying put the Cunningham Vang on to get to that point. What's the symptom that you put them on too tight?
Good question. If we have the Vang on too tight, this is going to sound, I don't mean it to come out this way, we'll be visiting Tyler for a new boom. We can overdo it, you know, but it's almost like you want to pull it on really hard, and we'll see that bend in the boom to the point where we go, oh, that's plenty, you know what I mean? Because the more we bend the mast, we're going to get those wrinkles, you know. So we would ideally like to see these wrinkles, you know, appear. Maybe they'll be about this long from the mast down towards the clew. Okay.
But you could pull it until then you could back it off a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, and I think we're going to go out and practice today, so there's no reason to really press our equipment, if you will. But having said that, you know, getting comfortable with how much Vang you can put on is valuable. You know, and obviously you guys all know this, as we get near the top mark, that would be one of the first things, well, no, that would be the first thing we do is let that Vang off, you know, so that as we bear off, the Vang doesn't get tighter, and then we definitely will be breaking the boom, you know. Is that fair? Is that a good way to say it, Tyler? I think, and what I would do there, if it were me, you guys, is I would go out, I'd go downwind and say, Vang looks good. That's the way I want the main to look, and we could talk about that, but nothing too fancy there. We want the main to look good, so it'll take some Vang, and I might put a little piece of tape somewhere to know where that is. Because as we round the weather mark, we want to ease the Vang off to unload the boom, but we don't want to let it all the way off, so if we had a mark that we put it to, we'd be set. Does that make sense? So that would help us keep the speed up as we go around the top mark. And then if we have too much Cunningham on, you know, we're stretching the sail too much here, we can pull the draft too far forward, which means the shape, and I'll try to draw this, if this is the mast, and it looks something like this, versus what we want to see. Whoops, I'll set it right. Can you still see it okay? Yeah. How graceful is that? So yeah, the Vang's too tight. So if we go from here with the Cunningham set and we're looking at something like this, okay, let me do this better. But you get the point. This is half way back. There, the draft is way far forward there. Now I'm going to throw something at you. Can you guys see this back there? I'm afraid if I... Here, we'll try it again. Little edge there. Maybe I'll be a little less aggressive. So let me put a jib in front of this. Okay? What do you think is going to happen with that sail versus that sail with a jib in front of it? You know, you got the slot. Exactly. That's how we know if we got the Cunningham too tight. The backwind, that's excellent. So if the draft is pulled too far forward and there's no wrinkles along the luff and we've got backwind between the main and the jib, then we know we've got it on too tight. Well, and I'm going to add another caveat to that. But does that make sense? So the Cunningham we want to pull on is, you know, tight, but we still want to have a little bit of wrinkle down here in the lower quarter of the main. And we're going to have these wrinkles, and if we overdo it, then we'll see backwind. And we know, we have a good idea on where the jib ought to be, right? With that top batten straight back, and most important, that telltale flowing off that top batten. Everybody know what I mean by that? That tells us it's right. If we have this sailcloth in the main hanging around the front, then that'll close that slot off and that telltale will stall. The other thing I was going to say, on a day like today when this is windy, and this is more of a technique, goes into that gear changing and being fast in a breeze, we let the main out, right? We got a big wicked puff and we let the main out. And what happens to this slot when we let the main out to balance the helm? Closes it up. Do you all know when the main starts luffing like that? It's, oh geez, it's blowing 100 here. This is really scary. The main's luffing. You know, if the crew has the ability to crack the jib out just that much, all of a sudden the main will go whack and fill up again, and the boat will be able to climb back up into the wind, and it makes a huge difference. So, and this is a technique that takes a little bit of practice, because as soon as you let it out, then gradually you want to pull it back in. So, you know, if all this stuff we're talking about is heavy air sailing 101, then 201 would be a crack on the jib and then pull it back in. The puff hits, we ease the main and it starts to rag, and then we ease the jib out and pull it back in.
What about the weather sheeting though in that case? Would you pop that first? Or?
Yeah, I would say, Ryan, is this, you guys blow the weather sheet when it's blowing hard, like on a day like today? Like the weather sheet wouldn't even...
We don't even use it sometimes. It's really bad.
That's what Zeke said as well. He said these days they don't put it on when it's real windy.
You move the leads back.
And move the leads back, yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Is there an order, you know, to, okay, we're going to do Vang first, then a bit of Cunningham, and can you talk a little bit more about, you know, when you're on an upwind leg and as you're, you know, letting those controls in and out, you know, what your cues are?
Yeah. So the Cunningham is going to follow every time. I mean, and I'm exaggerating when I say this, because it's not like we're going to play the Vang and every 30 seconds. Although in the ideal world we would, to be honest with you, play the Cunningham. But anytime there's a bend, a difference in the bend in the mast, that distance between the top and the bottom changes, you know what I mean? From here to here. So it would dictate a change in the Cunningham. So in the ideal world, we would pull the Cunningham on when we pull the Vang on. And then in the ideal world, when we ease the Vang off in a lull, we'd let the Cunningham off. So that would kind of follow. And the Vang would come into play, I think, Dave, just the windier it got and the more overpowered we got. And you got to say that depends on your crew weight. You know, back in the old days when we used to sail with 3, you know, that, and it was a little while ago, you know, we'd sail with 500 pounds, if you can believe it, you know, what was that, 20 years ago. And we'd put the Vang on when it was blowing 25, you know, because we could hold it down. But if we're sailing at 300 pounds, which a lot of us do now, the Vang might go on when it's blowing 10, or even, you know, depending on how overpowered. So does that make sense? Does that sound good? Yeah.
What is there any significant difference between halyard tension and Cunningham tension?
That's a good, actually that was one thing that Zeke suggested I re-emphasize, and Ryan can help me with this. It is easy to crank the mains up so tight that first we jam the shackle into the sheave at the top, and then we risk breaking the halyard. That's the first thing that can happen. But the second thing that happens if we get it up too tight is we eliminate, I guess, how do I say this, the effectiveness of the Cunningham adjustment. We pull it all the way up to the top. There are no wrinkles in the luff, and that might be good if it's blowing 18 or whatever we're going to see out there. But when we go around the weather mark, or if it lightens up to 10, and we want to let the Cunningham off to get wrinkles in there, we can't get them. So this is going to sound kind of funny, but I think, you know, we can leave the dock with the halyard where we think it ought to be, but I think it's almost one of those adjustments we want to double check when we get out there to make sure that it's not down too low, so we like bottom out the Cunningham down here. You know what I mean? Pull the Cunningham on all the way, or that when we let the Cunningham off, we get wrinkles along the luff. Did I explain that well, Ryan? Does that make?
Yeah.
But when you say that's super important.
Yeah, overtensioning the halyards is not a good idea ever.
So let me ask you, what happens in light to medium air? We overtension the Cunningham, knowing what we've talked about here a little bit, or not Cunningham. We crank the halyard up, put the crank in the terrarium thing down there, we sail away, and we don't think about it again, but it's too tight and there's no wrinkles along the luff. What are we going to see?
Draft too far forward.
Draft too far forward and? You said it before.
Oh, you're getting the backwind.
Backwind, exactly. Backwind. We'll get backwind in the main, and in light to medium air, that is slow, right? That makes a big difference. So, okay, does that make sense? And what we're talking about here is gear changing, you know, and frankly, while we've talked about this in the Scott and the things that are really important, all of these things apply to other boats too, okay?
So could I just summarize then what I heard?
Yeah.
Rely perhaps a little bit less on halyard tension and more on adjusting the Cunningham. Like you want the halyard to be up, of course. I mean, you want the right amount of tension, but you don't want to adjust it by yanking on that. Use the Cunningham instead.
Exactly. Okay. And so that way you have some adjustment. You have the ability to change gears. Like the halyard, if you go up too high, takes all the effectiveness, all the gear changing out of the Cunningham out of play. Or when you go downwind, you're just going to have this because you can't get the Cunningham off and the wrinkles along the luff.
Right. Okay.
Okay, is that good? Yeah.
Greg, I have a problem in my boat. I've got the Cunningham run to the centerboard cap. Letting it off doesn't ease the Cunningham once it's on, particularly in a blow, because I think you get a lot of friction in the track. So, yeah, I can throw it off, but it doesn't go up or down.
That's a good one. Don, I had my boat, one of my boats rigged that way, and what I found that I had to do is go with smaller and smaller and smaller line to make it run, and then it just tore my hands up. So I said, forget it, and I put it up on the front for the crew. But I hear you, it's hard, but what I would get comfortable doing is say, I've used the Cunningham, you know, Joanne, lean in and pop it, you know, grab the line and help pull the line through so the friction was gone. So it was almost like I would ease it and it would go all the way off and then I'd pull it back on. But I liked it still there because when the Vang was on, it was easy to pull the Cunningham on and kind of match without somebody coming in from a hike to go get the Cunningham. Because as they would say, I was never hiking anyway, so it didn't really affect what we were doing. Yeah, Ryan, did you have something?
I was going to say, sometimes if you just wait a little bit, it will go. If it's eased off, it'll start working up. It's sort of like when your board is, you're trying to drop it, and if it's got some pressure on it, it won't go down, but it'll start to work down.
Good point. Yeah, that's a good point.
The smaller line puts a good.
Yeah. Okay.
Can you say a word if you are coaching a boat out here today and their main is not up all the way to remind them about loosening everything up before they raise it?
Yeah, so we'll look for you guys. And, you know, I think it's not magic whether it's an inch or 3/4 of an inch or 1.5 inches away from the top, you know, being down. The magic part is that you don't run out of adjustment down here, or that it's not so high you can't get any wrinkles. You know what I mean? So it's not like it's a super crucial adjustment. It's more just making sure that you have those things, like you were saying, available to you to change gears. But we'll take a look at it, and we could shoot a video of that. We could look along the luff. We could look at the Cunningham here, and we could make a suggestion. But I bet you it'll be one of those deals today. It won't be worth changing it because it'll be pretty windy. Okay, any other? So what I'd like to do now, if you guys are cool with this, is just talk briefly about starting. Actually, we're still doing okay. And then we'll talk briefly about starting. So we don't want anybody to get hurt. Because I think this is an area where a lot of gains can be made, but more to the point, a lot of losses can be had. You know, if we're being risky at the start or we're putting ourselves in a dangerous spot, okay? So let's start off, and we just have your basic starting line. First thing we need to know is which end is favored, and nothing magic. There's all kinds of different ways to do it. I'll tell you what I've kind of graduated to, and it seems real basic in that I'll head the boat up into the wind. And this is really basic, so I apologize. And the main's luffing. Now, the main can be luffing, but unless we double check that the boom is right over the center of the deck back there, we might not be all the way head to wind. So we'll luff up Yeah, look at that. You could look at your little wind doohickey if you want to do that, but I think it's almost easier to look where the boom's bouncing over the center back there. And this is the part I'm a little embarrassed to admit, but it really works pretty neat, is I will stand up then and look at the foredeck, because we know that's perpendicular to the center line. And I'll look at one side where it's going, and if that's below the committee boat, and the other side is angling above the committee boat, like this, if this is a foredeck, oop, I didn't make it straight, like that, and like that, that would tell me that the weather end is favored. You know, in a boat like a Lightning where the straps go straight across, which is really different, it's real easy because you can literally stand right there and look at it. But anyway, that gives you a good idea. And when you get used to it, you can eyeball it and say, oh yeah, it's weather end favored. And I'd almost say, if I could say this, if it's so close you can't really tell, then it's not worth worrying about it. So now that we know that, if I could say that, we almost might want to say, now we'll stay away from that end. Because we know the whole world is going to start up at the favored end. And when it's a weather end favored, shall we say, we know there will be a lot of boats piled up here at the weather end, and we've all seen it, and there's only going to be 1 or 2 boats that get out of there in good shape. And there's going to be a lot of boats that get shot out the back, or hopefully they're not parking up in here, you know, luffing, because we're going to talk about that here in a second, above the ley line to the committee boat. Hopefully they're not up there. There's nothing worse than that. And I'll probably say that 5 more times here before we're done. But everybody's going to be piled in this area. All we want to do is to be in a spot where we're taking advantage of the fact that the breeze is a little bit to the right. So if we're a third of the way down the starting line from the boat, it's a plenty good spot. There are exceptions where you might say, man, they have to be really slim and something super big, like there's a huge puff over here, or maybe there's real wild current or something that would dictate you have to get to the right to get out of the current. But I don't know what else there would be that would warrant putting yourself in a risky spot to get out of there, because we may come out of there a hero and be in great shape, or we may be shot out the back. Okay? And that can happen down here too. If it's a leeward end favored and we're down here, there's nothing more embarrassing and more stressful than we're lined up on the pin and we don't make it. And we got to jibe around. And of course, the whole world is here lined up at the leeward end, and there's nowhere to go but to take all their transoms and go to the unfavored end anyway. Whereas if we're here, you know,